Welcome back to the Red Dice Diaries, and I've got my Gaming Bugbears cap on for another edition of Gaming Bugbears. And this video I'm going to be dealing with, that's right, the long pause in games. Now, we've all been in games where this happens. You reach a natural pause in the game, or perhaps you've just finished a particularly dramatic scene or a climactic confrontation of some kind, and then an eerie silence descends on the gaming table. All of the player characters look at each other, no one speaking for several minutes. The GM obviously has nothing plotted for this part of the session, or is frantically looking through their notes to find out what to do next. And the pause can just seem to stretch on for what seems like hours. It may only be a few minutes in reality, but it seems an awful lot longer. It's rather like that old phrase about a watched pot or kettle never boiling. And a long pause can be extremely damaging for player participation in a session, because if the pause goes on too long with nothing really happening in a game, players are inevitably going to get bored, or they're going to drop out of character, they're going to start chatting about work or other things that they're doing in their lives, and that's perfectly natural. However, it's not really behaviour you want to be occurring in the middle of your session. That sort of stuff's for like after the session is finished or before the session starts. You should really be focusing on the narrative and the story that's unfolding in your sessions. Unfortunately, the problem of lengthy pauses is one that all too often arises in many role-playing games, and it's unfortunate really because it's something that's so very easy to avoid, and there are a number of different ways that you can do this. Now, first of all, it can come down to a matter of lack of preparation as far as the GM is concerned. If the GM has sufficient prep, then they shouldn't be caught unaware of what's going on, or more likely, if they've not planned it all out to the nth degree, they should have one or more sort of floating encounters or scenarios that they can drop into a session in order to break up this sort of delay. Two, even if the GM hasn't got that level of prep and doesn't have any floating encounters, often it's easy enough to improvise a small encounter using what the GM knows about the campaign world or the current goings on in the session. Three, a lot of systems, certainly the more narrative or story-based systems, have character flaws or aspects or whatever they're called in your particular game system for characters that the GM can look at and draw upon to help them improvise a scene. Four, and finally, the most simple way for a GM to break up a lengthy pause is to ask the player characters what they're doing, and to suggest that a lengthy indecision may result in consequences. For example, as a GM, you might say, "Okay, so what are you doing? Remember that you've just fought your way into the courtyard of Castle Darkhold. Another patrol of guardsmen may pass this way at any moment." Now, even if you don't have a patrol of guardsmen come that way, the very fact that you've added that note of urgency and you're directly questioning the player characters as to what they want to do should hopefully spur things on. After all, the player characters may have simply been sitting back and musing about it and may become lost in their own thoughts, or they may be waiting for someone else to step in and that person isn't doing so. By directly asking them what's going on, you're opening the floor to anyone to suggest things, and by adding that extra note of urgency, not only are you giving them a little push to help them on with coming up with a decision, but also you've potentially set up a small improvisable encounter should they really take too long. For instance, in the example about the courtyard of Castle Darkhold, if the player characters still dillied and dallied around for a long time after I'd asked them, then obviously they've encountered guards previously. It's easy enough to recycle the stats of some generic guardsmen and have them walking on patrol around the castle and run into the players. Hopefully that little bit of action will then further the plot and lead on to other things, or at least them making a decision. So in conclusion, long pauses can be really damaging to a game, and it's something that's particularly easy to avoid. If you take nothing else away from this video, as a GM, when you're running a game, if you find yourself faced with a long pause, just ask the player characters what to do, what they are doing, sorry, and present them with an incentive to come up with a decision. And if worse comes to worse, if you've reached a really long pause and the player characters are considering weighty matters and may need some more time to process it, and you've been gaming for a long time, maybe everyone's a little bit tired out, maybe everyone's a little bit worn out. Don't be afraid if it comes down to it to say, well, we're going to end the session there and we're going to pick it up from this point next session. And that gives the actual players a lot more time to consider their decision. Obviously, you may not want to do this in time critical situations because you'd be giving them far too long to consider a decision. You may want them to make a snap decision, but if it's a lengthy pause after a dramatic scene, maybe they just need a little time to process it and think of their next move. Don't be afraid to end the session there if that's what it takes to keep your game going. Have a little discussion afterwards, give them a bit of time to think about it, and hopefully they'll come back invigorated in the next session with some decisions made and press on with the narrative. If you've got any comments about what I've said in this Gaming Bugbears video about the dreaded long pause in games, please leave them below in the comments box. And if you've enjoyed this video, please click on like and subscribe to this channel. And until I see you in the next video, I look forward to reading what you've written. Thanks very much for watching.